All right. We're just gonna wait for people to arrive. Looks like we have one person. We have two. So people are slowly arriving. As you're arriving, please let us know where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you. And I'll just go ahead and get started as people are coming in. Um, Hi, I'm Omar Acevedo, and I'm the Literary Program Coordinator at the Mark Twain House and Museum in Hartford, Connecticut, and I'm delighted to host this program for Advika and the Hollywood Wives. First, I need to thank our sponsors. Our virtual programs are produced in part with support honoring the late Frank Lord. We are happy to honor his memory with these programs. We are also incredibly grateful to the Wish You Well Foundation and Connecticut Public WNPR for supporting all of our virtual programs. Please consider supporting our museum by becoming a member. All members receive free admission to our author programs like this one. You get free admission to the house and museum, year-round discounts in the store and cafe, and much more. I will put a link in the chat right now, and you can peruse that later and think about it. Now on to our program. We are welcoming Kirthana Ramisetti and Juhea Kim for a conversation about Kirthana's new book, Advika and the Hollywood Wives, A Tale of Marriage, Scandal, and Fame. Our author is a former entertainment reporter for Newsday and the New York Daily News, who has written her fair share of stories about the lives and deaths of the rich and famous. She has a master's degree in creative writing from Emerson College and has published work in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, Today.com, and elsewhere. Her debut novel, Dava Shastri's Last Day, was a Good Morning America book club selection. Our moderator is an author, artist, advocate, and editor of Peaceful Dumpling, a sustainable online magazine. Her best-selling debut novel, Beasts of a Little Land, was named a finalist for the 2022 Dayton Literary Peace Prize and a Best Book of 2021 by Harper's Bazaar, Real Simple, Miss, and Portland Monthly. She earned her BA in Art and Archaeology from Princeton University. She is currently working on her second novel and continuing her environmental and animal advocacy in Portland, Oregon. I have not read Kirthana's novel yet, but I have read Juhea's and it is absolutely amazing. So I highly recommend it. And we encourage you to have a conversation in the chat. If you have a specific question, you can post that directly into our Q&A section. Please also know that you can click on captions to see live auto captioning of this event. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, I will be putting a link in the chat to purchase Advika and the Hollywood Wives through our museum store. Your purchase will support our museum and our honored guest. So that is all from me. I will turn this over to Kirthana and Juhea.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. And thank you, Omar, for that wonderful introduction. Sorry for taking over, Kirthana. I know this is your night, but I just say something because I love Kirthana, and we have become friends since publishing our first books at around the same time. And I read both of her books, and they're both so compelling and riveting, and that propulsive storytelling power is something that is so rare and something that I always strive for. I got Advika and the Hollywood Wives in the mail and devoured it in like a day or two, which never happens to me, never. And especially with galleys, incomplete pieces still in progress, I often have to put them down and do something else. But I just fell in love with this story, and it was just sparkling. So I'm gonna start out with some questions. And this is a long question to begin with, but if you bear with me, there is a question at the end. So one of the things that I noticed in both your books is the love of movies. And as an author myself, I do feel attacked when people assume a character, especially a main character, is an author stand-in. But I do think, yeah, I know, but I do think it's okay to think that Advika's love of cinema also mirrors your own because of your background, very well-known background as an entertainment journalist. So, um, and when Advika explains why she loves movies, it really struck with me. Was one of the scenes that I was like, wow, this is very interesting. She says that she loves movies because they always follow a certain path, that they have these tropes and they're predictable. And my first instinct was, oh, I don't agree with this statement whatsoever. And then uh, not too much after I read Advika, I also read another recent book by Matthew Salesi's, The Sense of Wonder. It's a new novel by this well-known writer. And one of the main characters in that novel also says something very similar in reference to K-drama. And I was like, wow, this is widespread. This is like pervasive. And then I started to have a more qualified feeling about it. But can you explain what this is about cinephiles, like having this thing about tropes or a certain predictability, and why is that fulfilling in a way?
Sure. And by the way, I just want to say, Juhea, it's so lovely to be able to do this event with you. We actually met, I was just thinking this around 2 years ago, in May, because we did our first panel together. So it's kind of nice to be here with you.
Full
Uh,
circle.
Full circle. In terms of movies, it's interesting. Yeah, I'm definitely a fan of movies. We all grew up watching movies, and I'm no different. But in terms of the technicalities, in terms of screenwriting, I didn't know that much. I had a pretty good idea because I'm so steeped in entertainment and pop culture. But in terms of the technicalities of like how every screenplay and probably even a TV series, they follow certain story beats. So it's not necessarily tropes per se, although those do exist, but you always know if a movie is 90 minutes long, when certain things will take place. And I feel like
Mhm.
for a character like Advika, who's had so much turbulence in her life recently, as the novel begins, she's immured in her personal life. The structure of a movie and knowing when to expect certain things to happen would be very soothing for her.
Mhm. Mhm. And that's what I started to realize. Sorry, I called it tropes, but the exact words that she used was beats. And I started to have those same thoughts. It's actually saying something a little bit more profound about her place in life and who she is as a person. And also, just as a more macro conversation about art and what we look for in art, sometimes we want to be broken open and shocked or whatever, to be shaken out of our comfort. But I think also art is also comforting, and um, it it can be a way that we feel fulfilled, and seeing a character that you root for, um, who you see yourself reflected in, have some sort of path that seems understandable and in the grand scheme of this universe can be reassuring. And art doesn't always have to be so not reassuring. Art
Right.
can be the opposite of
Yeah,
shocking and disturbing. So
definitely.
um, I loved thinking about that on the other side of my immediate reaction.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about that whole concept is the idea like you can't dream about something if you've never seen exist. And for Advika, she loves movies so much, but she never feels that movies loved her back necessarily, at least movies like Hollywood movies, movies filmed in the US. And that's why Bend It Like Beckham in my novel is such an important talisman for her, because it's the first time she sees, oh, there's a path forward for me. I can be a screenwriter, and I can see someone who looks like me and has my life experience in a major film. So yeah, that becomes a very important part of the novel.
Hmm. Yeah, totally. So, going a little bit along that path, and I'm not going to give away any spoilers in this conversation, but I really wanted something for her, for Advika, and was maybe surprised when it didn't ultimately happen for her at the end. And I think it's actually great that you made me care so much about her fate that, I wanted her to do something that I would have done. Um,
I want to know what that is after this call. I want to hear what that was, but go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, after this call.
Yeah.
But so a lot of readers also ask me this question as well. How did you decide your protagonist's fate? Like, did it suddenly come upon you in a dream, or like, why did she end up that way?
I just think a lot. I think it's the same way for my first book too. I think I always envisioned the bittersweet ending for her, where she gets to have some sort of triumph, but there is also some semi-tragic things that happen on the way to that path as well. But I also feel like her story in many ways is just beginning, even though the final page ends in a very certain part of her life. We also leave in her place where she feels the most secure and strong that she's ever felt in quite some time. So I feel like even though her fate might seem bittersweet on the face of it, also you get the chance to see that this is her future is wide open for the first time. And rather than, because what she in this novel, she's married to a much older man who's very powerful, and he pretty much tries to control her life. And for the first time, we leave her when she really feels fully in control of her fate. So I felt like that was a great place to leave her.
So now it all makes much more sense, because when we leave her, she's actually not at the end of her life. Spoiler alert, she is still a young woman with a lot to look forward to, and I had forgotten about that because I just forgot. But now you let me know that she's actually in a really great place, and we can probably look forward to her further action somewhere out in the world of fiction. um You said something about she's married to a much older man. This wasn't actually one of my prepared questions, but I just wanted to say the romance part of it really hooked me at the beginning. And I totally believed in their romance, and it it's certainly unhealthy and dysfunctional. We learn very much why. But at least when it started to take off, you really wanted to see this airplane take off and go on and on. And so why this much younger woman would fall for him, that was never a mystery to me. I'm like, that's very reasonable. Of course he's charismatic. So I just want to congratulate you on painting romance. I think writing romance is extremely difficult. Of course, writing sex is also extremely difficult. Convincingly portraying chemistry between two fictional people is hard. I think harder than a lot of people think.
I thank you for saying that, because that definitely was a complicated, difficult thing to write, because you do want to feel like, and I've seen this reaction from readers too, like you kind of get why Advika, an aspiring screenwriter, falls for a man 40 years her senior, because he's charismatic, he is powerful, but there's also a massive age difference. Like, how does that even work in terms of relationships? So I tried really hard to make it seem like, okay, you can see why Advika would fall for this man, but maybe why you also think, well, maybe there's something not altogether right here, and she's not quite into seeing all the red flags.
Hmm. Yeah. Totally. I wanted to ignore the red flags as much as she did. Like, she could see it, but also just didn't want to acknowledge it until it was put in her face. Um, Going back to, or continuing along with Julian, the name of her husband character, he ended up being actually one of the characters that I empathized with towards the end. Um, and I think it shows your true skills as an author, because he ended up being a truly complex character and not just a cartoon villain. And I do think he's a clinical narcissist. But he also misses out on that one thing that he really wants in life. And this reminded me of this really kind of life-changing critical essay that I read in the New Yorker many, many years ago. It was about Vanity Fair by William Thackeray, and maybe you have even read this essay, but it was talking about why Becky Sharp is such a compelling character.
Yeah, I know what you're talking
You read
about. I
this?
think,
Oh my
yeah,
God,
I'm
you
pretty sure I read this.
okay. Oh,
Yeah.
And it opened my eyes. I'm like, oh my God, if I remember one thing about fiction writing, this is the only thing I need to remember. And for those people in the audience, why is Becky Sharp this horrible, incredibly pathologically, terrible person? And I think the modern word for it would be she would be a sociopath nowadays. Why is she compelling, even though she's kind of evil? And the critics said it's because she really, really wants something. And as soon as somebody really desires something, we root for that person. And if you take away what they want from them, then we empathize with them. I'm like, okay, so that's the basics of empathy. My question to you about all this is, was I supposed to empathize with Julian? And did you, the author, his creator or Advika, at the end, feel empathy for him?
That's such a good question. And the other thing, besides writing a romance that is like actually like you believe it, like a believable romance, the other thing was writing this character who had to be such a suave, like gentleman kind of guy. You get why a person would fall madly in love for him or fall madly in love with him. But then he's a narcissist. I mean, he just is. And that's what Advika finds out as she goes through the novel. For me, what I realized I had to tap into, because this novel always was Julian was not a great guy. Spoiler alert, he's not a great guy. But for me, what I realized is I had to tap into his humanity, because every person, no matter who they are, thinks they're the hero of their own story. So I had to really look at things from Julian's point of view and find out, like, he has 3 ex-wives in this story. Advika is his 4th wife. And I realized in order to make Julian human and a compelling person, and also give him motivation to why he'd feel a connection to Advika, one of those ex-wives he truly loved, and he didn't realize his love was poisonous and smothering. But for him, that was his true love. And once I hit on the idea, I'm like, okay, this is a person he truly loves. And he feels similarly for Advika, not knowing how his love can be very painful and hurtful. That's what opens up the character for me.
So as I'm listening to you, I'm discovering new things as well. What you said about every person believes that they're the hero in their own story. I'm like, wait, that's true in literature as well as in life. I'm gonna hold on to that as a piece of wisdom that I'm gonna use in my own fiction writing. It's a great tool, and which kind of also created a new question for me. So there was a kind of a, should I go into this? It's a little bit of a spoiler. There is
Yes.
one person that he married for a very short time. And then the marriage was annulled. Uh, is that something that you can reveal? Because I don't think that the secret of that is really revealed in the book itself, but I am curious. So what happened between them?
I think we were talking before earlier about the fact that Julian has very strong motivations, right? He wants something very badly, and that thing was taken away from him.
Mm.
That short, quickie marriage that happens between his 2nd wife and his 3rd wife, his exes, is because he's so desirous of something that he kind of went beyond. He's a very logical person. He's a very smart person, logical person. He thinks things through. And that was an aberration for him, where he just kind of went and made an emotional decision and then decided to quickly undo it. And that's kind of something Advika learns about Julian. As she sees him and gets to know him, he can react emotionally, but he can also react logically. And that's what makes him such a kind of formidable person once he goes from like husband to like, I don't know, nemesis, not nemesis, but like just someone she has to kind of take down in a way in order to get her own freedom.
Mm-hmm. And I do have to say, the way he kind of is unpredictable, rational, but also highly emotional and volatile, but also predictable. It sounds crazy, but it's so real. Like, I feel like I can picture this person. I have met this person in the form of many ex-boyfriends. Like, this person exists, which was one of the delights of Advika for me. The book, not the character. Okay, going on. So, all right, lots of questions. I was truly in awe of how you wrote your 2nd book, and many people say that the sophomore novel is a particular struggle, But as your friend, I thought you did it in such an inspiring and almost effortless way. For those readers who don't have a backstage pass, as I do, can you tell us a little bit like the inspiration and how you started writing it, the process?
Sure. Yeah. And thank you for saying that. You weren't witness to all the sheer amount of panic, like days and days of panic, sitting at my laptop thinking, what am I going to do? But the premise, so I'll just quickly explain the concept of the novel. Advika is an Indian American aspiring screenwriter who is mourning the death of her twin sister. And she meets Julian at the governor's ball, which is the official after party of the Oscars. And because she's in such mourning and bereft and also estranged from her family and her friends, she throws herself into this romance. They have a quick courtship and a marriage after 3 months of dating. And then Julian's first ex-wife passes away, and she's an actress. And then she says, when she passes away, in her will, she states, I will give $1 million and a film reel to Advika if she divorces Julian. And that's what kind of sets her on this path to figure out, okay, who did I marry and who is this person? And she kind of learns a lot by investigating the lives of his 3 ex-wives. And so the premise of that, if you can believe it, Juhea, was inspired by Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. But I was watching it, and there's this dynamic. Basically, I saw a dynamic where there was a woman on the show, and I knew she was about to divorce her much famous husband, who was a music producer. And then after that, this music producer remarried a woman who's 40 years younger than him. And I just thought how interesting and odd it would be to be in this kind of May-December romance, but also with someone not just so much older than you, but all his ex-wives are famous too. Like one's a reality star, etc. And so that's how the concept was born. In terms of writing it, did you want me to address that as well? Like how I wrote that thing?
Well, it looks like this. Everybody, all the people in the audience, authors look like this when they're working, right? More or less. So, okay. Did you have any goals, maybe creatively or even in terms of the general publishing experience that were different for this book compared with your first?
Yeah, and I would say go back to what you were saying about second novels. Second novels are really hard. I think maybe the hardest you can do, because when you write your first novel and you get published, it's kind of the summation of your entire life and your experiences and what you want to say to the world in that first book. And then you have to ask yourself, like, what else do I have to say in my next book? And that's what can make it such a challenge. And for me, I realized, well, one of the things I decided once I had that premise inspired by the reality TV show is that this can very easily be a family saga in some ways, but I didn't want it to be because I already did that with my first novel. So I decided to instead focus on friendships and specifically corner. Did I cut out for a moment? Am I
You
good?
did. You did.
Okay. Where should I begin from?
You focused on friendships.
Yes. So decided to focus on friendships in this novel. And the concept of friendship is found family. And also the people who are in your life for a very long time and know you really well, and also newer friendships that could arise that can also be very important to you. So I decided to focus on friendship. I decided to focus on just writing. Again, Dava, my debut, was a novel I'd always wanted to write in terms of I wanted to write about the impact of music on my life. And I didn't want to repeat myself in the second book and write again about music. So I felt like writing about movies and giving a character a love of movies would be a lot of fun. And I love movies. I don't think I love them as much as Advika, but I do love them. So it's kind of fun to explore that kind of fandom in terms of being someone so aspiring to want to write movies, but not quite getting the opportunity, and just kind of see that through her point of view.
So, I thought a lot about friendship in your book, and I was like, how do I turn this into a question? It's more of a statement. I couldn't come up with a good question for it. And my statement is that when I read your books, especially this one, what comes through is, I hate to say this, but what comes through is your humanity and like probably the way you relate to your friends in real life, because some authors are really gifted at writing a single person monologue and this character has no friends. And I'm like, Okay, for me, that is impossible because my life has been shaped by my relationship with other people and especially my really deep friendships. So very hard, even a depressed protagonist in my world will have at least one, if not more than one, really great friend. And Advika, even though she's in this difficult place in life, she's not suffering alone, like the what do you call it? The sad girl book. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
This is not a sad girl book, and I think it's probably reflective of your own warmth as a human being. Beware of those authors who are really gifted at writing sad girl. That's something about them.
Well, that's very kind.
What?
Yeah, go ahead. Did you want to continue?
Wait, what? What did you say?
I was going to say, I was just going to talk about friendship a little bit, unless you had, I was interrupting you.
Kirthana, this is your night. You can interrupt at any point. Tell us more about
Okay.
friendship, please.
Well, I wrote this book specifically as a tribute to the friendships I had growing up. I grew up in a community in Orange County surrounded by other Indian American families. And because my relatives, most of them were based in India, these other families were kind of our cousins and family of sorts. So these were people I grew up with. I've known since, a lot of them since we were grade school, and then we've seen each other through different stages of our lives. And it's a very interesting and important friendship because it provided a sense of belonging I didn't know I needed, and until actually I moved from the West Coast into the East Coast, and all the friends stayed in the West Coast. And so I really want to pay tribute to that idea of that kind of friendship that is such an important force in your life and an important provides support and is a bedrock. But I also wanted to pay tribute to the idea that we can make friendships later in life that can be just as important. And I hope to do that with Advika and her friend Olive. They have a very spiky, interesting relationship and friendship. They become very close for certain reasons and circumstances. So I also want to honor the idea that we can make friendships at any time in our life, and they can also play an important role in our lives.
How Advika and Olive interacted, and just Olive as a person in general, being an Asian American, but not portrayed in a very stereotypical model student way, it was very refreshing and true to real life, because Asian Americans come in all sorts of ways. We're all just human. So I think that's a good way to move on to the next question, which is that one of my favorite aspects of Advika was the candidness and really the bravery with which you discuss racism, sexism, and gender inequality. And you don't shy away from telling this, or you don't sugarcoat the internal dialogue of a POC woman observing and experiencing these inequities, especially in a highly competitive creative industry. Frankly, this is something that I have trouble, or I fear speaking up about so clearly, even in the form of fiction. What made you decide that this is important to you?
I just think it was a natural outgrowth of what this book was about. If Advika was going to find out she's married to a person that she didn't think who he was, and he's a power player in Hollywood, and he's a lot of power and a lot of sway over people's lives and careers, and he's also a very controlling husband, it is almost inevitable that we will be discussing these issues related to racism, sexism, and gender inequality. And so I felt very natural to tackle that through his relationships with each of his ex-wives and also through Advika. And it also was just, while I was writing this, I had two things in mind. I purposely set the novel in 2015, and that's for two reasons. One, it's the year the Oscars So White hashtag campaign went viral. And so it was the first time there was an actual conversation happening about the lack of diversity in Hollywood. And I wanted Advika to have that on her mind as an idea. Is like, wait, maybe there is a way for me to be able to break into Hollywood and be a screenwriter. And maybe Julian is also aligned with those values as she kind of decides that he is. But also, I have this purposely take place before 2016 and the Me Too movement. Because one of the things I realized in the aftermath of all the revelations coming from the Me Too movement was the idea that we had so many people, especially women, just disappear in terms of their careers from Hollywood. You see them in major movies, they'd be the co-star, and they would just be gone. while their male co-stars continue to star in roles like to this day. And at the time, I didn't really question it. It's just like, well, I guess that's just what happens. And then to know the reason some of these women had their careers cut off, or they were blacklisted, like to know the fact that so much power and sexism affected so many careers, and we would just been blind to that fact, really enraged me, to be honest. And I really want to address the idea in terms of the microcosm of this novel, of the idea that so many talented, amazing, interesting women, we might not know them, or we might not know the extent of how accomplished they are because of the whims of powerful men.
So, as you were speaking and you said you were outraged, I realized that everything you're saying is true, and I haven't seen it discussed in literary fiction that much, or maybe I've just been looking at the wrong places. And yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head in exposing this and just saying this is the reality. So I appreciate you doing that. Going back a little bit to craft, writers all have what they're obsessed with and keen on. And some of us love to focus on the environment and scenery, for example. Some people have a thing for sentences that pop and have staccato effect, or perhaps the very opposite, which is very Garland-like and has this longueur. And I want to say that your writing is, and this is me guessing. It's like I am telling you to your face what your writing is all about. To me, it feels very character driven, and I felt like, as a reader, I felt like exploring the complexities of these characters was the propeller driving the narrative. But this is my personal opinion. So what do you focus on? Like, are you hearing the dialogue first and writing it all down, or what's going on?
I think for me, everything I write comes from a premise of what if? And then for me, the character comes from exploring the answer to that question of what if. In this case, it's what if somebody married a man much older than her and then learned all these terrible things about him because of what he did to his ex-wives. And so having that premise made me kind of figure out who Advika is and why she's in this position to even marry him, and also who Julian is and how he ascended to power. And then what the three marriages in his life signify, both about him as a person and also about the people he married. And so all of my characterization comes from just exploring my premise. And I find that very helpful to do that, because I'm writing about people like in kind of extraordinary situations sometimes that I don't have personal experience with. So I have to kind of think it through as a thought exercise. If this is happening, why is it happening to this person? Why is it happening to that person? And what made them that people that they would be in this situation?
Actually, I think that's why I think your book is kind of a perfect blend of plot driven, character driven. It's all sort of mesh well together, which I think is the ideal, because you're showing the character through action, which is the definition of plot. So I love that. That's your own process. Do you have any like literary inspirations, literary crushes, heroes that influenced you?
I would say A Visit to the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. Excuse me, I completely blanked on the name of my literary crush, which is not great. But no, A Visit to the Goon Squad and the sequel, The Candy House by Jennifer Egan. That was really formative for me as a writer, especially, of course, the first book, because I read that before I even started working seriously on my first novel. But the way she kind of takes, again, she also explores a love of music with technology. She flash forwards to the future in both her books. And she's also very creative in her storytelling in a way that just makes me so excited for literary books as a literary form. And the idea that books can do something that no other medium can do, that movies or TV shows can't do. And when I think of Jennifer Egan's work, I think she shows the capabilities and complexities of books and what they can offer us as readers that no other medium can. And so I'm very much inspired and influenced by her work.
Um, Kind of going, Jennifer Egan inspired this next question. And I do know that your first book, Dava Shastri's Last Day, is being developed into series for HBO. And Advika is an aspiring screenwriter. Do you see yourself also doing screenwriting? And if you have already done it, how does it compare to novel writing? What's the difference, similarities?
I have done it in a very brief capacity. I took a class a long time ago, which was adapting. It was it was a movie adaptation class where you would watch a book and then see how it was adapted into a film, and then at the end we had to adapt a short story into a screenplay, and that's my extensive screenplay writing experience. But I am interested. I'm actually very interested in. I was interested thinking about screenplays and how they work and what makes them so effective while writing this book. It's a very visual medium. Also, it's a medium of very few words. And so I think it'd be an interesting challenge. And so I am interested. I just haven't done it seriously yet.
Actually, I think your strengths as a novelist transfer really well to screenwriting because I think you are a very visual writer, and you're also just sensory writer in general because you reference music and sounds a lot. You bring in a lot of different senses, and I also almost always have a very clear visual sense of what we're looking at when I read your books. So I think that's probably a very good indication that screenwriting is in your future, like in that because um, so I don't know about you, but do you also love sneaking in Easter eggs or some secret detail from your life into your book, Romana Clay, of some level? So you kind of did hint, like, guys, I'm not the genius, like, who somehow understands her life. I'm not her stalker, but I did get the hint that the parrot is sort of an Easter egg or a hidden real life truth. So explain to us what the parrot is.
Sure. So in the novel, Advika's mother owns a parrot, and it plays a very important role in a scene when they're all watching the Oscars together, her parents and her friends. And the reason this parrot exists, and actually I'm so glad that parrot exists on a narrative level as well as a personal level, because my mom is a huge reader and she asked me to name a character after her in my book. The only problem was that I was nearly done with the first draft. I was just like, I don't have any characters. And so we were out to dinner, actually out to lunch with my agent, because my family was visiting me in New York at the time. And my agent said, well, why don't you name it after a bird or a parrot? And I'm like, perfect, I think I'll do that. And so in trying to come up, and it actually kind of worked out perfectly because I really did need that parrot scene in terms of signifying the close bond that Advika has with her family and her friends, and why she's so broken by the fact that she no longer has a closeness with any of these people. And I think the parrot scene, named after my mom, really shows that warmth and that bond. And so she's already asking for a character to be named after her in the third book. So I'll put a little more thought into it this time and not name her after a bird, but we'll see what we do.
I think that that's really brilliant, and that is so cute that your mom wanted so much to be a part of your book, and it's an adorable tribute. Um, where was I going? Okay, the next question. Um, what advice would you give to people, either young creatives like Advika who are struggling in their life or creative path, or just readers in general? And I know that this is very vague, but somehow in the past couple years of being an author, I realized that people seem to think authors are general wise figures. And everybody from high school children to very, the elderly will ask me for advice. And I've just started giving them. So if you have any words of wisdom, um, like how should we live more meaningfully, or even something as specific as like to young writers, here's one advice that I would give you. Like, I always tell them to make a mission statement, and then I go on and on about the purpose and how the purpose gives you the power to overcome all the hurdles. But don't take it from me, take it from Kirthana.
Well, I like that. I never heard that before, but I think that's a great idea to kind of say something for yourself, exactly what you want to accomplish, rather than kind of just leaving it as a thought that is circulating in your mind, but to write it down on paper and kind of make it an official thing. I think that's a really good idea. The idea, the advice I would give to young creatives is something I had to learn for myself, which is before my debut novel, I wrote 2 other novels, and neither of them will ever see the light of day. But the second novel I tried to write specifically was a YA novel. And I only did it because The Hunger Games was really big at that time. And I was like, well, this is a way to break into publishing. Everyone loves YA. I'll write a YA novel. And I wrote the entire draft. And when it came time to work on it, I didn't have any motivation because I wasn't coming from a genuine place. And so when I wrote my debut novel, I really did pour everything that I ever wanted to write about and everything that was important to me. And I wasn't thinking about the market or publishing trends or anything else, because this is more about just proving to myself I could write a book that was meaningful to me. And that's the advice I give to young creatives. It's the idea, if you write something that's really personal to you, it's be much more likely to be very universal and find an audience, rather than trying to write what you think people expect of you or think that will be something that will sell.
So I absolutely 100% agree with everything that you said. And thank you so much for being open about the book in the drawer that you don't tell people about. I mean, listen, a life of a writer, even after you've been published, is just full of rejection.
Mhm.
That this road for me at least is gonna be for the rest of my life. I've given up on being J.K. Rowling famous and just sending my stuff anywhere, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, Juhea sent this in, roll out the red carpet." Don't care. Um, so thank you for letting us know that someone as fantastically accomplished and successful as you are, have done something that's not going to be published, because that's a lot of people. And authenticity, I think, is like such a huge advice. And I agree with you totally, because another thing too, both of your books have in common that it's so true to your personal interests. It features South Asian characters. Um, it just feels completely personal to you, and which made it that is why it's successful, because it's unique. So I echo that sentiment completely. And my own book came out of that same sort of mindset, because I used to work at Knopf as a editorial assistant, about a decade ago, because it was 2011 to 2014. And even at that time, all the books that were being published and all the young authors that were being feted, um, hi, book. Good to see you again. Um, at that time, about 10 years ago, all the young authors that were being feted and successful, and critics were raving about them, they were white New Yorkers or Brooklynites, and not only just their racial background, but their attitude was very different from mine, because I'm an immigrant. I'm not hipster. I am not blasé about anything. I go into things very earnestly. And at that time, what was hip to me was a little cynical. So this whole culture of publishing was very, very alien to me. It felt like it was telling me you don't belong here. And when I first started trying to write, I thought about writing under a white pseudonym. And you think, oh my God, that's crazy. Now you think it's crazy because you see authors with um, more unusual spellings and pronunciations than before. Now it's much more accepted. Even 10 years ago, I think it was not. So, so I'm glad that you and I both stuck it out and like really came into our own, even though publishing was really bad back in the day and still now.
Well, But I always think about Dava, and maybe you think this way about your novel too, is I think if I tried to publish it 5 years ago, they would have said no, because it is intensely personal book, but it's also depicts South Asian culture and South Asian people in not a way that was very typical or popular in publishing. And so it was my goal for both these books and any future books. I'll always center South Asian women as my protagonist, because I'm just trying to write the book I always wanted to read when I was younger, and always make sure that I'm writing about something I'm truly passionate in. And so the fact that that book or either books find an audience is amazing, because I always think, like, if I wrote this book 5 years ago, it'd still be sitting in my drawer. Nobody would be reading it. Publishing shifted in some ways, in the sense that I never felt the need to have to change my name or change that who I was trying to be or present the book I wanted, but I might have 5 years ago. So there is something to be said for that, but definitely doesn't mean that there isn't room for more change in the industry.
So, speaking about 5 years ago, for especially South, Indian American literature, it's the curse of Junpa Lahiri, right? Where there is this significant literary voice, and her type of writing is the only type of Indian American writing that's allowed, and there the publishing powers that be don't want to give room to other South Asian writers, because we already gave you one seat, and that seat belongs to Junpa. I definitely felt that way being Korean American, and I think publishing has like a certain number of seats allotted to Korean American authors. So I love that you carved your own path and showed it can be many different things, because we're just human. So I know that you wrote your first book while you were still working a day job. Am I right?
Actually, I wasn't. I was more freelancing. I wasn't.
Oh, you were okay.
Yeah,
So, but you were working as a pop culture reporter.
yeah, like a writer. Yeah, with essays and whatnot. Yeah.
The reason I ask is people always seem to enjoy learning how you balanced your uh your bread and butter work, your waiting tables with your novel writing before you became big. So tell us how that looked like. Were there real years of struggle, or were you just not really struggling?
I was lucky in this sense to have a lot of support and not be writing that book while working a full-time job. But there is something to be said about when nobody's expecting you to write this book and you write it anyway. That's the hardest thing to do. When you're not on deadline, when you're writing it for yourself, you don't know the future of the book, no matter where you are in your life. If you're working a job, if you're a stay-at-home mom, it's just really hard each day to like take the moment to be like, I'm gonna pour myself into this and keep working on it. And for me, I think what really helped me was just prioritizing the work and making time for it, in the sense that like we spend so much time on our computers all day working, especially as writers. And so for me, it was just like, if I did this first thing in the morning, then I'll still be fresh. If I try to wait until the end of the day to work on this, it's the first thing that's gonna go by and I'll end up watching television, as an example. So it's just trying to prioritize it and making time for it. But it's never easy, but especially if you're working a day job, it's especially not easy. And I have given advice to people to say, like, if you need to wake up at 4 or 5 in the morning to just spend like 30 minutes on your book, that's great, because it all accumulates after a while. If you spend 20 or 30 minutes on your book each day, in a year, you'll have a full manuscript. So it doesn't mean you have to write for several hours every day, all day. It's just like trying to carve out small amounts of time each day, and you will get there. It's just like doing the work and making time for it.
Do you actually get up at 4 to write in the morning?
When I was on deadline, I was, yeah, actually, because I just felt like I had so much work to do and I didn't know what else would come up. Because when I was working on the second book, I was about to start promoting the first book. So I was kind of balancing two things at one time. And being an author, it means like doing this stuff, being in promotional mode. And being a writer is just being hunched over your laptop, trying to focus on the story you're working on. So for me to, especially towards crunch time and balancing both those modes, I had to there were days I was getting up at 5 a.m. just to make sure if nothing else happened that day, I got the work done I needed to get done.
So I always knew that you had crazy work ethic, and this is just humbling me. By the way, I always act like I'm the hardest worker in the room, but I
You
know that
are.
I see that's how good I am at pretending to be the hardest worker. People believe me. But the way you put out this second book that is just so full of life and so true to reality made me like really all sorts of emotions went through my mind when I was reading this, and just so gripping in a record amount of time while promoting your book is just incredible to me. Do you have any secret sauce? Like, for example, not to make it all about me, I love drinking hot chocolate while I write. And this is really embarrassing, but in the year 2022, I think there were more days when I had hot chocolate than not had hot chocolate. So that's definitely my secret sauce. But you don't have to have the palate of a 5-year-old. What do you like to use as a crutch? or motivation self tree? It can be even yoga. I don't know. What do you use?
Well, it might not surprise you to hear, because I'm such a pop culture person, that when I was writing the second book, I liked having noise and chatter around. If I can't replicate coffee shops, I still kind of need that. So I would put on TV series I'd already binge watched before. And so I knew exactly what was I already seen the show. I just put it on to have on in the background. And actually was really great company for writing, because that, the TV show is playing out. I don't have to concentrate on it, but it's just there. It's like keeping me company in a way. And sometimes writing is very lonely. And so I felt like these TV characters I knew already from watching like Mad Men and The Good Wife specifically. It was a great way of like having some company while I worked. And also having just some kind of chatter and noise in the background, which weirdly helps me focus. If it's completely silent, sometimes I can't focus at all.
So I agree with you. Writing is lonely. And yes, it can feel like you have company and hey, they're my friends. I'm writing with my friends. So I get it. But I still can't believe you would choose reruns of TV shows you've already watched over chocolate. But I am a chocoholic. Don't listen to me. I have this weird addiction.
Maybe I'll try that for the next time, just reward myself with chocolate to see if that
Don't,
works.
don't. You're gonna fall into this spiral. Don't do what I did. Now I don't think I can revise without it, and I think it means bad things for my future. Um, I'm just gonna take this moment to ask, does anybody have questions? If not, I can continue asking a few more. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box and I will read from them. You don't even have to turn on your screen.
I also want to just take this moment to thank Juhea for tonight, because she is doing this from the UK. So right now it's almost 1 a.m. for you, which is crazy. And you're such a great friend. And I just truly appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. And you know what? Some people don't say thank you after you bend over backwards to join on a Zoom. So I really appreciate it. And Kirthana is such a good literary citizen. It would be a crime not to help out Kirthana. But I don't see any other questions in the chat box, so I guess I'll just continue. Was it your dream to be a writer from when you were young, or did this sort of slowly develop as an adult? How did this come about?
I was always wanted to be a writer when I was younger, and maybe you relate to this. It's just I didn't know how you could do that and make a living, right? I love stories. I loved reading, but like when in terms of like looking up job listings, there's no like job listing for novelist. So I found a way to do writing about something else I loved, which is pop culture. And gradually as an adult, I got my MFA in creative writing, which was a really great experience, but it didn't make me feel any closer to actually being able to publish a book. So it was just one day I just thought, I think I just hit this moment. I'm like, I'm getting older. It's kind of now or never. Let me try. And at least if I nothing else, I can say I wrote a book I loved, even if no one else reads it. And so, yeah, that's how it went.
So I relate to what you just said a lot, because I also didn't think a full-time artist was a career path that was open to me. It was just kind of mystifying how people could make a living being a full-time painter or a full-time writer, like novelist. Like, how does that even work? And eventually I fell into that path. But I think that's also very hopeful and uplifting, for people, that you don't have to have had this focused idea of what you should be, because as little kids, like, you don't even know life. So how do you even know that you want to write about life? You know what I mean? Um,
That's so true.
it's very hard for you as a little child to know, I want to be the next great novelist. I think it's a little precocious, maybe.
Mhm.
We just have maybe time for one more question. What's next for you? And I mean, is there, Advika, the next series in the works? Are you allowed to say something like that if it were? I think it's highly adaptable, but do you think it is?
Um, sure. I saw there's a question in the chat that I wanted to answer really
Oh, there
quickly,
was.
which is there anything you cut from Advika that you missed? Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you for being here tonight. You know what, funnily enough, I was trying to think, and I don't think so. And it's only because when I write my books, I outline them in advance. And so luckily I didn't have to cut out anything major, which I feel lucky about, because with Dava, I had to cut out a whole big scene. That novel was too long. In terms of what you're saying, Juhei, I'm working on a third novel, and I can say it starts at a wedding. That's what I can say about it.
An Indian wedding.
Indian wedding, yeah.
Okay, so like a big, extravagant affair. I cannot wait to read it. It has another makings of a grand, sweeping novel. So thank you so much for answering all of our questions. Oh, Kirthana meets Indian matchmaking. Yes. Oh my God, I was watching that show yesterday and just really falling into it. So this is perfect. We need this. Kirthana X Indian matchmaking when. That's my last statement.
Great. Thank you so much, Juhei, for moderating. And thank you so much, Kirthana. You two are just amazing, amazing writers, and it was an honor to have you both in conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so much fun. Thank
Yeah. I hope we can have both of you back for your next books. And we'll say
I think
thank you.
Kirthana might beat me to it with her third book. I think she might finish that before I finish my second book. Like, we'll see. It's not a race, you guys. It's not a race.
It's not a race. No.
No, it's every writer has a different pace, just like every reader has a different pace, right? And thank you so much. I just before we end, Kirthana, thank you so much for saying so I write, away from my day job. So I want to become like a published writer one day in the future. But one of my little pet peeves is that when people give writing advice, they never mention having a day job. Most people have day jobs before they actually become a writer. So we need to know how to balance having a day job and writing before we can actually just focus on the writing.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very true.
Yes. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Thanks so much to our audience for joining us. And please join us again for another program in the future. Come to the museum for a tour. We're open 6 days a week, or 7 days a week, actually, from 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And you can see our brand new exhibit, For Business or Pleasure, Twain Summer Sojourns, which focuses on the Clemens family's American summer vacations between 1870 and 1910. And that is all for this evening. Thanks again and have a great night.
Good night. Bye, everyone.